Time. Time. The answer is time.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature.
Hey guys, I wanted to share some additional information. It's not every day that we get some news in terms of the legal narrative. And so I want to take you guys through a legal document that was filed really in the last day or so, last day or two. And initially it doesn't seem to be particularly interesting. It's a civil action between Barry Morphew and CHAFFEE County, Colorado, et al., numerous defendants, and it's titled Unopposed Motion for Extension of Time to Submit a Responsive Pleading. And that doesn't seem like much of anything, does it? But it is actually something quite significant. And so it says here, the undersigned conferred with counsel for Mr. Morphew, who does not oppose the relief sought herein. Relief? What relief are we talking about? CHAFFEE County Defendants' responsive pleading deadline is October 13, right? 2023. And they're actually asking that the defendants' deadline be extended. Why? Well, here it comes. Yesterday, on October 12, counsel for Mr. Morphew contacted the defendants. Why? Because he's considering the dismissal of certain of the defendants. In other words, he's basically deciding he's not going to be suing some of them. Then, right? And that's already quite interesting because he's basically accused them of unfair treatment, to put it mildly. And of course, that was before the body was discovered, and now the body has been discovered. And now one can certainly say that you could say they were on the right track, or you could say they had reason, certainly in light of this change of circumstance, to believe that something serious had happened, right? And something serious has happened, and Suzanne Morphew was murdered, right? So without the body and without evidence that someone had died, the pendulum was sort of swinging in Barry's favor. And clearly, I don't think it's rocket science to say the pendulum has swung a little bit away from Barry. And I think this motion is some of the first legal evidence we're seeing that it is having some legal import. Does that make sense? Now, there is nevertheless a slippery part in this document, a part that's a little bit tricky, because it says that there are other defendants, or there are possibly some defendants that the charges are going to remain against them. In point 4, it refers to the remaining defendants. So he's certainly not saying I'm taking the lawsuit off the table. He's just taking it off the table from some of them. And that's quite an interesting response. It's quite an interesting response in terms of that. The other thing that's interesting is, where does the legal machine now resume? What mechanism now takes place, from here on out? And I think the situation that the investigators are faced with is the investigation does now need to resume because of these huge developments. And so I think there's a situation now that some of these officers either need to be allowed to return to duty and allowed sort of the ability to have unfettered, in other words, no restrictions in how they go about the investigation. I don't know whether there's been some legal response in order to make that the case. I think the other thing that is quite tricky here is again, this decision, who is going to be part of the legal army, the prosecution's team going forward? Do you get rid of everybody that was part of the previous one? I don't know if you can do that, and I think you can maybe get rid of some of them, but certainly some of the evidence that was picked up wasn't necessarily prejudicial, I think, in an obviously biased way, put it that way. So that seems to be what's kind of going on, is a bit of legal housekeeping, right, in order to facilitate whatever is the next phase. It is interesting that we are how many weeks now from the discovery of Suzanne's remains, and there's really been no press conference from Chaffee County. There's been very little. There was one statement from Barry's attorney, no statement from Barry himself, no pleading to the media for information about her killer, as he did kind of in the beginning when he seemed to suggest an abduction. And so we are in a very interesting legal pickle in terms of this particular case. And so this is the first signs of things starting to change in that respect. Now, the other thing I want to bring up, because it was not that clear in my previous video, is that, how much money did Suzanne have separate from Barry? And the answer is that she'd inherited around about $208,000 from her mother, Adrian, when she died in 2013. And bear in mind, it was 5 years later that the Morphews left Indiana and moved to Colorado and bought quite a big house there. The other thing that happened was that, and this was 1 year before they moved, in other words, 2017, Suzanne's grandmother-in-law, Helen Burnett, she died in 2017, and then Suzanne inherited another $217,000. So if you add those two together, it's not $500,000, but it's pretty close to that. And then I think her father was also pretty wealthy, but of course he died after Suzanne died. And I'm not sure whether any inheritance went towards any of the Morphews, Suzanne's daughters. I wouldn't be surprised. But that provides you a little bit more detail in terms of these amounts of money. Obviously, we're talking about millions of dollars when you look at just the sales of the two houses. Then that takes you to millions of dollars. So, those are large amounts. I don't really think anyone is going to scoff at those amounts and say they weren't significant. They really were significant. Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.